Minister, small businesses and community groups right across the state continue to suffer from unaffordable insurance premiums. Now, the Action Plan on Insurance Reform committed that the general scheme of legislation to rebalance the duty of care would be brought before Government by June 2021. That deadline was missed. In July 2021, the implementation report then committed that it would be brought forward in September 2021. Again, that deadline was missed. So what is the current status of this work to reform the duty of care by your department?
Thanks, Deputy. Firstly, just to say insurance reform is a key priority for this Government. It's reflected in the programme for Government, but also the Government's action plan for insurance reform, which you've just outlined, and indeed in my own Justice Plan of 2021 and 22, which I'll publish shortly. This is a whole-of-government effort, and I'm pleased to say that of the 66 actions contained in the action plan, 51 are now completed, and 26 of those are my own department. Data from the Personal Injuries Assessment Board indicates that award levels have reduced by around 40% since the introduction of the Personal Injuries Guidelines last April, which I hope you'll agree is a significant step in meeting our commitment to making insurance more affordable for consumers, businesses and community groups. And I think we've all seen, myself personally, a reduction in our own car insurance in the last year alone. In addition to bringing the guidelines into operation, the enactment of the Criminal Justice Perjury and Related Offences Act of 21 last June has been a key element of work in my own department. We've also examined changes to reduce insurance fraud, including penalties for insurance fraud in consultation with relevant agencies, and the Insurance Fraud Coordination Office was opened by Garda Síochána in July. In accordance with the action plan, my department has completed the review on occupiers' liability. This includes the duty of care and notices on waivers. Under that review, we've considered relevant current legislation in Ireland. We've looked at other common law jurisdictions, as well as notable Irish case law. Subsequently, we identified a number of options in relation to occupiers' liability, which the review has recommended pursuing, and I brought these options to Government last April. We're considering reform in two areas. Firstly, we're considering the introduction of provisions to ensure that an ordinary common sense to bear in personal injury cases. This usually leads to a dismissal or a reduction in the awards granted. So we're essentially codifying what's already happening in many instances, or in some instances, in our courts. This is recently in line with Superior Court rulings. Secondly, we're looking at, and I think probably more significantly, the introduction of a provision to allow for the voluntary assumption of risk. So essentially, if anybody walks into a place, puts themselves in a place willingly where they know that it might result in harm, then they cannot bring a case against the other party. And I think this is probably what a lot of people are looking towards. This recommendation was previously made by the Law Reform Commission. Just to set out the timeline, we're currently engaged with the Office of the Attorney General on these proposed amendments. It's my intention that on receiving advice of these, they'll be brought forward, obviously, and that it would be included in the Civil Amendment Bill, and the intention is that would be brought forward in the coming months. Thank you.
Minister, our economy and our communities will be unable to bounce back in a sustainable way from the pandemic unless all sectors and all sizes of business are enabled to resume activity in a stable and supportive environment. And the insurance crisis is impacting on that. And if you talk to businesses, you'll hear that time and time again. And reform is moving at a snail's pace. The personal injuries guidelines that were adopted last year saw personal injuries awards fall by 50% within 3 months of them taking effect. But yet we all know that insurers aren't passing on those type of savings to customers. And I would urge you and your government to support my Judicial Council Amendment Bill, which would monitor and pressure insurance companies to do so. Now, but rebalancing the duty of care is crucial to bringing greater certainty and underwriting capacity to the insurance market. And I was absolutely shocked, I must say, given that you say this is a key priority, this is a whole of government, but shocked not only have you missed your own 2 self-imposed deadlines, but the legislation to reform duty of care through the amendment of the Occupiers Act was not even included in the spring legislative programme. So what's the causes for delay, and when do you have a new deadline that this time you might try and meet? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Of the 66 actions contained in the Government's Action Plan for Insurance Reform, which includes 4 departments, 26 of those are completed by my own department. So there's a huge focus has been placed on insurance reform in the Department of Justice, and we've already introduced legislation. So while there have been perhaps a number of deadlines missed, the focus has not been taken away from insurance. The focus has been rightly on insurance in many other areas as well as this. What I intend to do is not bring forward an independent separate bill, because I think that would only take longer, but these are amendments that can be put into the Civil Miscellaneous Bill, which is due to come in the coming months. So we are at the end stages of this. We are engaging with the Attorney-General, and I completely appreciate and understand the importance of this legislation and making sure that businesses, individuals, community groups, those who represent place spaces, other areas, that they can see the benefit of this legislation. I think people are already seeing the benefit of the 51 actions that are already now complete. And just to give you an example of one, my own department has worked with An Garda Síochána, where we've seen an increase in the Fraud Bureau of a third of their staff, which has allowed a new office to open up, engaging with the insurance companies so we can identify where fraud is taking place and where we can have a better, closer relationship to try and reduce those numbers overall. That in itself will discourage people from coming forward. That in itself will have a knock-on impact on insurance companies, and that in itself will have a knock-on impact on the costs that they are putting on to individuals.
Minister, I don't know if you know what's happening out in the real world, because you talk about your action plan and so on. In terms of businesses and community groups, they're not seeing a reduction. The vast majority are seeing increases in their insurance premiums. That's not just me talking. Talk to the campaigners, which represent a wide section of society in terms of the Alliance of Insurance Reform. They've told you time and time again, they've carried out surveys, and we can see it in terms of statistics. In terms of motor insurance, there's been small reductions, nowhere where it needs to be, but in terms of public liability, in terms of community groups, sporting organisations, businesses, your play areas and all the rest, they are suffering as a result of high insurance costs, and some have had to close down. This is a key issue, a key issue. You've missed deadlines twice. You've talked about bringing proposals to Cabinet in April, and you can't still give us a date that's a year after of when this is going to be produced. Now, you say that you're not going to bring forward a standalone piece of legislation because that would take too long, although if government really gripped this, it should have been done and dusted by now. But will you at least publish the amendments so we can see if government understand what is really required in relation to balancing the duty of care? Or have you got amendments that are in a way that can be published at this point in time? Because obviously there will be no pre-legislative scrutiny if you're just amending a previous piece of legislation.
Thank you, Deputy. Having met with and engaged with the Insurance Alliance Group and many members of it, and indeed members of my own community, what I'm very aware of is that it's not a silver bullet and it's not one single action that's going to make the changes that we need. Of the 66 actions, 51 being complete, we are starting to see changes in some areas, not all areas, and I think in particular some of the larger pieces around the guidelines last year. These take time to be able to see and reflect the changes in our pockets, and indeed for those in our communities as well. The legislation, as I've set out, whether it's in publishing the amendments themselves, we're focusing on two things in particular: that we codify where laws where judgments are already taking place, where common sense is being applied, where we've seen in court rulings recently dismissals or reductions in awards, but secondly where we introduce a voluntary assumption of risk. So that's very clear what that means. It means that if you walk into a place, an area or a setting where you may hurt yourself and you are aware of that, then you cannot make a claim afterwards. I appreciate this is extremely important for a lot of businesses, and that's why I have every intention to bring it forward in as quick a way as possible through the criminal or the civil miscellaneous bill, which is due in the coming months. Thank you.